Jesse, we are coming to the end of the season. Finals are happening, and we are starting to think about who's going to win the Brownlow. Obviously, the home and away season is done, so people are getting their Brownlow predictions in now. So I just wanted to have a chat about it today and sort of have a look at where you stand on it, because there have been some really strong performances from a lot of players this year, and I feel like throughout the season, there's probably been people that have been popping up as Brownlow Smokies. So I just wanted to have a chat about it. How you doing, Jesse? How you doing over there in Manchester?
Very well, thank you, my friend. Recovering from a bit of a week of booze. But other than that, going well. Happy to be back in the finals mix. And yeah, the Brownlow is an interesting one. It may be one of the hardest things to predict, even though we've seen everything we need to see. What we're really trying to do is predict how a variety of different umpires subjectively saw various games, and anywhere along the line they might have just once a week you might get a Brownlow vote that you don't agree with, but we have to project over the course of the year how that's going to end up. So it's really hard, but nonetheless worthwhile and fun.
At the end of the video, we're going to go through our top 5 predictions, so 5 through to 1, so stick around for that. The 2 current favourites are Patrick Cripps and Nick Dacos. I feel like if you ask most people right now, they will give you one of these 2. Nick Dacos' game has gone to a new level this season, Jesse. He's been a really polished player on the outside with his skills and his footy smarts. But what has impressed you most with Nick Dacos' season?
I think it's probably the adding the contested game, or at least really building on that. I did not see that coming. I perhaps thought that he was going to be predominantly an uncontested player, and I think your best ball users you actually want in that role. Like at West Coast, I kind of want to see Harley Reid getting more uncontested than contested. Him in space is dangerous, and that applies to Dacos too. I did not see a third-year player who is fairly lightly built. He's not a big guy by comparison. He had 27 contested possessions out of 32 in one game. And I just didn't see that evolution coming. I think he is unreal. And I was reluctant to jump on the bandwagon as hard as others. And now I'm kind of staunchly in defense of him. Whereas I feel like there's probably a sentiment out there that he's a little overrated because he's a star at Collingwood. But I think what we're seeing is absolutely sensational from Nick Dacos. So, yeah, I mean, he's impressed me in so many different ways. But I think the evolution of becoming a ball-winning midfielder inside and out this quick has been the most impressive.
He's started to really accumulate the ball as well. I think he's had multiple 40-touch games this season. And he's just a game winner as well. They have a board that they chuck up that says 35 when the game's in the dying embers and it's a close game, which it often is with Collingwood. Just get Nick Dacos the ball. I think they lost that game to Gold Coast, but he did everything that they could away this season. He obviously kicked the game winner against Carlton at the MCG earlier in the year. Likely to finish with 6 votes as well in the last 2 games of the season, which would be massive. So I think this vote will come down to the wire. Cripps is the other one, obviously a former Brownlow medal winner. He was a massive reason why the Blues were so highly touted at points this year, because this is one of the best footballers I've ever seen play the game. He's so hard to tackle. He just gets the game on his terms. He's a stoppage dominator. He's gone forward this year. He's just been such a pleasure to watch. He's put that Carlton midfield on his back this season. I feel like Walsh and Chera and those guys haven't really had that big of a year. So you wouldn't where would Carlton be without Cripps this year? Is what I'm trying to get at. What has impressed you most with Cripps this year, and how do you think he will poll on the Brownlow night?
In contrast to Nick Dacos, I don't know. I think this performance has been less surprising because we've seen this before from Patrick Cripps. I think the consistency piece is probably the impressive part. At times, he's been this amazing player. And then he's had periods of his career where he's probably a bit banged up because he plays such a brutal style. This year is probably, in 2022 is probably a bit of a fading memory for me now. But I think the consistency piece with Patrick Cripps is the most impressive part for me. 8 clearances a game. I think that makes him he's the number 1 clearance player in the game. He absolutely put his side on his back when they played West Coast. When they had about 17 missing players, he just said, nah, screw it, I don't care. So we know what Patrick Cripps is. It's just going to be how many games did he poll votes in, as dumb as that sounds, because Carlton did drop a whole stack of games towards the back end of the season there. I do think he was more like clearly the standout midfielder at Carlton. And I do think that probably works in Dacos's favour as well, which I think is worth considering. Dacos was clearly their best player in so many games, and that applies to Cripps too. So they're both really short favourites, in comparison to third. So we'll see what happens here.
These are the guys that you go to the footy to watch as well. Like your Nick Dacos, your Paddy Cripps, they're the face of the two biggest clubs in the AFL. So I wonder how much that plays into the minds of the umpires. Like they're just watching Cripps and Dacos do incredible things. They're hard players to keep your eye off is the point I'm trying to make when you're evaluating a game. Some other players, so I'd say the Smokies to take out the medal or go high in this Brownlow medal count. I'll chuck a few names out there. Caleb Sarong has had a phenomenal year, multiple best on ground performances. Zach Merritt has been one of my favourite players to watch this year. Obviously, a bit of a form slump later in the year by Essendon, but he single-handedly won them games this season. Bont, obviously, he's always up there, but never quite the top dog, although he is the top bulldog. And Errol Goulden as well has just shown his class all throughout the year. Probably not much of a smoky, and a guy that could actually win this is Lachie Neale as well. Do you see any of these guys pushing to win it, or just maybe get top 2, top 3? Who do you see pushing the most?
Absolutely, Lachie Neale, I think, is the most likely. So I think he's the third favourite, albeit $8, so significantly less in terms of favouritism than Cripps and Dacos. But I don't think that's going to be reflective of reality. If you ask me to guess, I think he's going to go a lot closer to winning it than that. When you consider last year, I don't think, again, going off memory here, but I don't think he was considered a major contender. Or at least there wasn't a perception that he had an amazing year. I think he's actually had a better year from the eye test without, going through with a fine-tooth comb. I've noticed Neale a lot more. He's a top 5 clearance mid in the game. He has played one less game than Cripps, if I'm not mistaken, which could hurt. These Brownlow counts go real tight towards the end. So that may cost him. I will note he's expected to poll 11 out of 12 votes between round 15 and 18. We know Brisbane had that shoddy start to the year, but they did still win more games than Carlton and Collingwood. So that kind of works in Neale's favour. I think he's a red-hot contender here. I think $8 is good value.
That's a great point you make. Brisbane winning more games than Collingwood and Carlton. He put Brisbane on his back for a lot of those wins. That Sydney game in particular was, really inspiring. We'll see how the slow start affects him. He's only projected to poll 3 votes up to round 7. So, but these projections,
I think that's true of Dacos too, no?
Yeah, true.
Both of these grand finalists had really slow starts. So, again, that's only a projection of what's going to happen. We'll see. If one of these guys polls better than expected in the first 7 rounds, then it completely throws it out.
Marcus Bontempelli is the best player in the AFL, probably. Well, all these guys are right up there. That's why they're in the Brownlow medal predictions. But, he never can just do enough to be the clear number 1 Brownlow favourite. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because of the Bulldogs and the way that they sort of are frustrating, and they'll go through a massive form slump and sort of play shit footy at points in the year. But to be fair, the back end of their season was phenomenal. I feel like Bont won't win the Brownlow this year. He could be, I'd probably say he'd be about 4th or 5th, but we'll get to the prediction soon. Treloar had a big year. I think Sam Darcy had some match-winning performances as well. Jamara, Liberatore taking away votes. Is that how you sort of see it?
Yeah, pretty much. And I can't help but feel a little bit of a bias for and against players that do and don't poll well, right? So, for instance, Zach Merritt, I know you asked me about Bont, but Zach Merritt polls are okay, but he's always been consistently good. Nick Dacos, I think, last year polled a little bit better than I expected. So we know that he's a vote getter. We know that about Lachie Neale. We know that about Patrick Cripps. Bontempelli, I think, did have an amazing year. He did play a bit of time forward, and the Bulldogs had some other real midfield heavy lifters, like Treloar comes to mind, and Liberatore also had a good year as a clearance midfielder. So I do forget how many games Libba missed, so I'm a little bit scratchy on the details there. But I think if Bontempelli hasn't won it before, I suppose he's gotten close. I just can't help but feel a little doubtful. He did have 26 disposals a game, and he kicked 32 goals. which is pretty damn good, like more than a goal a game for a guy that plays midfield and, you know, two roles essentially. He's a number one score involvement player in the comp and number 4 for inside 50s. So, look, I think he's the best player in the game. I hope he wins it, but I can't help but feel I think towards the back end of the top 5 is closer to reality.
Another name that you mentioned there, Zach Merritt. Loved watching this guy play. Every time he gets the ball, he just makes impact. Another guy that is in that same category is Isaac Heaney, who's obviously ineligible, which is pretty ridiculous. So out of the rest of these guys, so your Gouldens, your Merritts, Sarongs, who do you see could be a sniff to make top 3, let's say? Because, you know, Goulden, Merritt, and Sarong, they're probably not going to win it. They'll probably be around that top 5 range. But can you see anyone having a Gus Brayshaw-esque year and really polling well?
Okay, so there's one guy that's in my top 5 that I might save, and I will go to a player that I don't think will, like, I don't think it's likely he makes top 5, but if you had to find the category of a bolter that polls better than expected, I'm actually going to say Zach Butters. I think if you look at the Brownlow website, also the AFL website, like you have to go to the second page of favourites, I think, to find Zach Butters. But he was an All-Australian midfielder, which puts him right in the top category there. And I know that's like simplistic, and I know that Brownlow votes, you know, are calculated in a very specific way, but I wouldn't be surprised if he is the guy that's polling a lot more votes than is expected. He did have a fantastic year, only expected to poll 21, but yeah, he could be that Gus Brayshaw type this year, and I think he had a sensational year as evidenced by his All-Australian blazer.
Yeah, he was pretty consistent all throughout the year as well, I feel. Butters, Port Adelaide finished the season with a lot of wins, so that's a good call. The Sydney bunch, like you got Warner, Heaney, and Goulden all taking votes off each other as well. 3 players that were All-Australian and are in the top 10 favourites for the Brownlow. Caleb Sarong's a player that had probably a good 4-5 best on ground performances throughout the year. His last 2 weeks weren't too compelling. But I suppose we're just at that point in the video, Jesse, where we just have to give our top 5 because we've probably discussed who we think is in that ballpark. So why don't you give us your top 5 Brownlow medal predictions?
I'll hit you with my top 5 Brownlow predictions. I'm going to go at number 5. I'm going to go with the Bond. Like I said, I hope he wins it. I think he's the best player in the game, but with the competition for votes there and the fact that he played a little bit forward, I don't know if that's going to work for or against him. At number 4, I've got maybe a little bit of a surprise. I've got Errol Goulden, who I think actually did have a very consistent year, relatively speaking. I think he might have started slow. He does have competition for votes with guys like Warner and Heaney, but I think he has been prolific this year. He's had 2 games over 40 disposals. And what may work against him is the number 1 turnover player in the game, but we know he polls well. At number 3, I'm mixing it up a little bit here, and this equal favourite, Patrick Cripps, I've got sliding into 3rd spot here. He did have a fantastic year, top clearance midfielder in the game, but I just thought I'd shake it up a little bit there because I think that Lachie Neale might poll better, and he will go 2nd. So he's the 3rd favourite. Like I said, I think he actually played better this year than he did in last year when he won the Brownlow. Proven vote getter, always at the clinches. I think he goes number 2. Now for number 1, I'm going to say Nick Dacos here. Not only is he a proven vote getter, and last year might have won it without injury, and he did have a slow start to this year, but I think his transition into being a ball-winning midfielder, and he was already getting votes, you know, as a more uncontested player. He's added that string to his bow. He has been so important to Collingwood. I think that will reflect in votes, and I think Nick Dacos wins the Brownlow.
He was my predicted Brownlow medal winner at the start of the year. True prodigy, modern AFL great. He is worthy of a Brownlow medal in a struggling Collingwood side as well, which is kind of mad. Just shows the class that he has. My predictions for the top 5 in the Brownlow are as follows. In 5th, I'm going to have Caleb Sarong. I think his effort throughout the year was very consistent. He was a starting All-Australian midfielder. And I think he had a lot of best on-ground performances. He was one of the best clearance players in the game. He has the record for the most 20-plus disposable games in a row as well. So he's a very consistent player. In 4th, I'm going to have Marcus Bontempelli. Unfortunately, not winning the Brownlow again this year in my books. Maybe he can. But I just feel like guys like Chalor and some forwards that the Doggies have may have polled big votes in some games. That's not to say that he can't win it. But in 3rd place, I'm going to have Lachie Neale. He's going to poll really high. He's going to push until the last round, I think. But I feel like the slow start that Brisbane had might just cost him his third Brownlow, which is nuts to think. If he won a third Brownlow, that could make him one of the best players of all time. I'm actually going to go a tie for first. And I know it's a bit of a cop-out, but Patrick Cripps and Nick Dacos have been inseparable this year. The way that they have dragged their teams through to wins, put both their teams on their back, they're as good as each other, and I just can't separate these two for the year that they've had. So I'm going to say there's going to be a tie for the Brownlow medal between Patrick Cripps and Nick Dacos.
I think I've tipped a tie for the Brownlow like every year since I started True Footy, because I think statistically it's got to happen soon, right? And it's been 21 years since we had a three-way tie in 03. I remember that.
Who won it?
That was Goods, Rashudo, and Buckley. And this is the
go.
first year that I'm not tipping it, which means it's probably going to happen. So that's a pretty good bet by you.
Yeah, maybe Neil gets up and there is a three-way tie. Get your 5-1 in the comments. Let us know who you guys predict will win the Brownlow. Thank you for joining me, Jesse. It's just hit 30k subs on YouTube. We all love you, Jesse. Proud of you.
Thanks very much, mate. And if anyone wants to see footy content, head to UCAT on YouTube.
He doesn't even upload anymore, bro.
No, sorry, UCAT FC.
If you want to get quick, fast, or strong this preseason, head to the link in the description. Drewzy's Athlete Academy is back up and running to get you in prime condition for this off-season, ready for next year. I appreciate you watching. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care. You plonkers.
Goodbye.